This is the public hearing of the Committee of the Whole regarding bills number 190152, 190153, 190154, resolution number 190164. Mr. Stitt, please read the titles of the bills and resolution.
Bill number 190152, an ordinance to adopt a capital program for the 6 fiscal years 2020 through 2025 inclusive. Bill number 190153, an ordinance to adopt the fiscal 2020 capital budget. Bill number 190154, an ordinance adopting the operating budget for fiscal year 2020. Resolution number 190164, resolution providing for the approval by the Council of the City of Philadelphia of a revised 5-year financial plan for the City of Philadelphia covering fiscal years 2020 through 2024 and incorporating proposed changes with respect to fiscal year 2019, which is to be submitted by the Mayor to the Pennsylvania Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority, the authority pursuant to the Intergovernmental Cooperation Agreement, authorized by an ordinance of this Council, approved by the Mayor on January 3, 1992, Bill number 1563-A, by and between the City and the authority.
Thank you. Today we continue the public hearing of the Committee of the Whole to consider the bills read by the clerk that constitute proposed operating and capital spending measures for fiscal 2020, a capital program, and a forward-looking capital plan for fiscal 2020 through fiscal 2025. Today we will hear testimony from the following city departments: Planning and Development and License and Inspection. Mr. Stitt, the first person to testify is?
And Fadulin.
Thank you very much. Ms. Fadulin, how are you? There will probably be questions for PRA, or I'm still RDA, PRA, and maybe planning. I don't know.
Okay.
I'm gonna have some
Come up. Hello.
save us from the long walk. Land bank, might as well all come, you know.
Right there. Okay. Good.
So the walk won't be as long.
All right.
Thank you.
We submitted written testimony, so I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm just going to cover a few highlights.
We really appreciate that.
Thought you might go for that. Good morning, President Clark and members of City Council. I'm Ann Fadulin, Director of Planning and Development. Joining me today are several members of the senior staff of the Department of Planning and Development. The mission of the Department of Planning and Development is to coordinate Philadelphia's planning, zoning, preservation, and housing functions to promote the economic health of all neighborhoods and the city. The department includes the Division of Housing and Community Development, Division of Planning and Zoning, and the Division of Development Services. And additionally, we work very closely with our sister agencies, the Land Bank, the Philadelphia Housing Development Corporation, and the Philadelphia Redevelopment Authority. Our plans for the fiscal year 20 ahead are to continue to promote equitable growth of Philadelphia, continue with further implementation of the 2035 plan, support the strategies identified in the Mayor's Historic Preservation Task Force report, implement the Housing Action Plan, and implement the city's comprehensive plan. As a lot of you are aware, in fiscal year 19, we successfully produced the city's first Housing Action Plan, which covers the housing spectrum from homeless all the way through market rate. And in connection with this, we are grateful that the administration and City Council have expanded resources to address the critical need for affordable housing in Philadelphia. Mayor Kenny's 5-year commitment of $80 million in local funding will leverage an additional $170 million or more in federal, state, and private funding. In addition, the $60 million approved by City Council in prior years has been successful in greatly reducing our home repair backlog, and the recently announced $40 million for Restore, Repair, Renew will mean increased opportunities for Philadelphia households to remain in their homes in quality living conditions. Our development services team is playing a critical role in supporting projects through the city's review processes and will continue to advocate for reforms to improve transparency and predictability for development projects seeking city approvals. The Division of Planning and Zoning responsibilities include maintaining the guardrails for our historic assets, crafting the vision of our city for the future, providing guidance for development to ensure our built environment meets the needs of our residents, and engaging residents through outreach and education to support neighborhood improvements. The Philadelphia City Planning Commission completed the city's comprehensive plan, Philadelphia 2035, in fiscal year 19. In the fall of 2018, the last in the series of the 18 district plans was completed, and now those district plans address specific land use, zoning, urban design, capital facilities, and other physical infrastructure issues throughout the city. And staff is now focused on working with city departments and external partners on implementing the recommendations from all the district plans. The fiscal year 20 budget for DPD approves additional funding for staff in support of the Zoning Board of Adjustments. There has been a significant increase in permit application and variance appeals filed over the last several years, compromising the ability of staff to deliver services effectively and efficiently. This increase in staff will allow ZBA to operate more effectively, to deliver services to residents and developers more efficiently. Staff will now be able to cover multiple roles. In ending, we are committed to building an inclusive environment that understands and responds to the diversity on our team and utilizes this knowledge to better serve the public. Thank you for your time and attention. We're happy to answer any questions you may have about our budget or plans for fiscal year 20. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me ask you a question. I guess this would be from the RDA. Not sure if any of you all were here in the capacity that you are at this point in time. So years ago, during the course of the development process, the Redevelopment Authority in particular, and I think you still have some certain designations, but they used to have what they call them project managers, and they were done by geographical area. And essentially, the council person or an interested party would call that one person, and pretty much everything from acquisition to ribbon cutting would go through that person. And it was actually a process that, was pretty successful, at least from my perspective as a district council person. But since then, we seem to have gotten away from that approach. Frankly speaking, you find ourselves, and I know myself I'm speaking for myself, but I'm sure that there are other district council people that have similar challenges, getting more involved in the development process that frankly we would like to be. So much so that you actually have people, and I'm not going to talk about the media today, but you have people that complain that council members are too deeply involved in the development process and prerogatives and all of these other things. But the simple reality is that if we don't get involved, the likelihood that things will move efficiently and swiftly is limited, if at all. And frankly, I'd like to be back in the old days, right? When you call me, when you say who got the award, and the next time you call me is you say, okay, it's time to break the ground. Then you call me and say it's time to cut the ribbon. I was real good with that, right? Because we have like a lot of other things that we need to do. So can you kind of tell me, and again, I understand most of you all were not here in those days and years, but I'm sure you have some historical perspective on that. Why can't we go back to that when the project manager for that area understood everything about that, and I didn't have to call this agency, the alphabet agencies, and didn't have to call all the different people. It was like just so much easier for us.
So
I know I set the table.
you know that you and I have that historic knowledge together.
Exactly.
Because back in the day, the project manager that used to call in your area was me. So actually,
and I think before you was Mike Coons.
Right. Yeah. Actually, after me was Mike Coates. Yeah. So we've actually been having exactly those discussions, not just in the Redevelopment Authority, but across the Philadelphia Housing Development Corporation, Land Bank, and the Redevelopment Authority, as we work to combine into one employment entity. We've talked about assigning folks so it will be more like that, where people are assigned a certain area so that it will be more one-stop shopping, and then sort of to take that a step further than where it was back in the day, we're also working in conjunction and having the Planning Commission and those roles also, so that we are really looking to get to the point where we almost have sort of a community development team that can be assigned to an area with a point person to cover everything from planning all the way through to project completion. So that's definitely something that we're working on. And actually, a lot of these folks are probably pretty tired of myself and Melissa Long, who have been here a long time, saying, you know what, we used to, and it's not that we don't want to look at things going, be forward thinking, but yeah, that is something that we're really trying to get us back to that.
Yeah, I mean, in addition to which, I don't want to belabor the point, but back in the quote-unquote good old days, we actually had a lot more strong community development corporations that had resources and the capacity to actually work with developers, for-profit, nonprofit, whatever, and they kind of like did all that work, and again, we got called in when it was time to cut the ribbon and take credit. So I'm glad to see that you're thinking in a similar way, because in all honesty, we do have like a lot of things that we need to do. I'm tired of calling Mike Coons up and asking, Mike, find out what's going on, because the people in the neighborhood want to know what's going to happen the whole 9 yards. So that's great.
Yeah, and I think it's expounded because, it was one thing back in the day, but now we've got exponential amount more development happening.
Exactly.
Right? So
Exactly.
the need is great.
All right, great. I look forward to that. Can you give me some sense of a timeline?
So we are in the process of consolidating the redevelopment authority, the land bank, and PHDC under one employment entity. We anticipate a lot of that will occur on or about July 1. And then so after that sort of technical piece is done, the work going forward is going to be about creating these teams. So we're hoping we have advancement on that by the end of this calendar year, but we'll probably by the end of this fiscal year be much more aligned under that kind of format.
Right, and that's basically the entire consolidation.
Yes.
In the final form of the planning and development.
Yes.
Per the charter change requirement.
Yes.
Great. One quick question. So every year, and this probably comes from the bean counters and not you guys over in the 1234 or 1515 market shop. For the last several years, we get our budget and it's like $500,000 gets cut out of the PHS budget, and then we come in and negotiate in the last 2 weeks when we sit around the table, what the council members want to see, and we end up negotiating against ourselves for the same $500,000. And I suspect this year there'll be minimal pushback. We said put the $500,000 back in, for PHS, and everybody says it's a great program. Why do we have to keep going through that? I mean, is it a part of the dance, or? And I'm okay because I've been here for a lot of dances, but if it is, particularly a program that is proven to work. As a matter of fact, and I don't know if you're familiar with this, that quietly, as to listen to some of my colleagues, particularly my colleague Councilman Johnson, about having a specific land management team for, again, geographical areas, because every area has different needs. Some areas might need to work with organizations for community gardens, or some might just need vacant lots clean, all these different types of things, but we founded these groups. So we quietly put in an ordinance about 2 weeks ago, I don't know if anybody paid attention, for $2 million to go to PHS for a program, and expand it way beyond the $500,000 that should already be in there. But, so what's your perspective on that? Should we be expanding that?
So my perspective is that the PHS Land Care Program is a great program. It's very effective. It employs returning citizens. It helps to improve our communities. It's a great program.
All right. So, and I know you work for the administration, and it has to go through the process, but when we're talking about, reducing poverty, and then the other day, I think yesterday with Commerce, we were talking about this whole entrepreneurial spirit, in that we're going 12, I think this Friday we have the program Roots to Reentry, where individuals or returning citizens are going through a program, they're learning life skills, whole 9 yards, and management, land management, and actually business skills. I think that's the quickest way we can get people to work. My council colleague over here was talking about commercial corridors the other day. How do we clean commercial corridors with neighborhood organization? I think that's a way that we can solve, one, the issue with respect to land management, land care, but also putting people to work, people from neighborhoods, and not go through this long, arduous process and funding CLIP, which I love CLIP, but they cost a little bit more because they are city employees, but yet the ability to get people in the neighborhoods opportunities and teach them life skills and teach them business skills so they can create their own companies, get one of them Fred Sanford trucks, and I know I'm dating myself, that they can actually do, cut grass and maintain land during the summer months, and then they can, in the wintertime, throw a plow on the front and clear snow out. I mean, those are the type of entrepreneurial opportunities we need to keep. So I look forward to your support when we discuss the $2 million additional funding budget. All right, so, okay, thank you. I got a lot of questions, but I'm gonna turn them over to my colleagues. Chair recognizes Councilman Greenlee.
President, good morning.
Morning.
Still morning, yes.
Yes.
Okay. Actually, piggyback on what the council president was just asking last thing. I was going to ask about the land care, and then also you mentioned in the budget overview a cut in the Philadelphia Land Bank. What does that entail, and the reason for that? Do you know?
I'm sorry, say that again.
You say the decrease is. I'm looking at the proposed
So
budget.
the decrease in land care and then the decrease in the land bank budget?
Right, yeah.
So the decrease in the land bank budget is about the funding for acquisitions. And I think that that's something that the administration just wants to have a conversation about how much is going to be really needed to do acquisitions in the coming fiscal year. But it's my understanding the administration is open to having that conversation.
Okay, all right. Okay. As far as the issue of affordable housing, could you just go over briefly, particularly with like folks come out of homelessness, things like that, briefly kind of what the focus will be in trying to help with homelessness, rental housing, that
Right.
kind of thing?
So as part of our work doing the Housing Action Plan, one of the things that really came to the forefront is that there are, and I'm sure the Office of Homeless Services can provide more detail about the efforts around the homeless population and the impact of the opioid issue on that. And we have a lot of very robust, very progressive programs around home ownership and supporting our homeowners. Where we really saw that there were some gaps was with protecting our renters and taking care of our renter population.
Right.
So a couple of the things that we're coming out with is, I want to say a year or so ago, the Redevelopment Authority in cooperation with the Health Department and who else was that? And L&I made an application to the State Fair Program to get some dollars to pilot a small landlord loan program. That RFP to get a funder, because the way that the fair money, we matched it with some Redevelopment Authority money, will go out, is that how it will be used is really to be like a credit enhancement or a loan guarantee piece. So the RFP to get a funder or a commercial lender on board is going out shortly, and we hope that that will be able to pilot a loan program for landlords that have up to 10 units, a loan up to $24,999. And so that will help to provide some support to landlords who rent to tenants at an affordable rate, but may have had difficulty doing improvements to those units. The other thing that we are working on rolling out is a shallow rent program.
What? I'm sorry. What?
A shallow rent program.
Okay, shallow rent. Okay.
That would provide rent support up to $300 a month for tenants to help them pay their rent. I mean, because even though there's been a lot of conversation about eviction and protections around that, all the data shows that upwards of 90% of the reason why tenants are subject to eviction is because they can't pay their rent. Mm-hmm. So we thought, well, let's figure out then if we can help people pay their rent. Okay. So also I just want to mention that there was a Federal Reserve report that recently came out that shows for very low income folks, which are people at 50% of median or below, the difference in their gap between not affording their rent and affording the rent is $303. Okay. So again, we've designed a program where we're trying to support with $300.
$300 a month.
That should be able to get, at people at 50% and above. It's hard to get to the extremely low income folks, but we think that again, we're going to pilot that. We think that goes a long way in starting to really support our tenants.
Okay. All right. No, Those programs sound good, yeah. And then finally, with the Housing Trust Fund, I see a significant increase in, which I know people have been asking for. Again, briefly, could you say kind of what that increase will go for?
Sure. So I think we have a hearing coming up in another couple weeks about that.
Okay.
But so the first tranche of that is $19 million in this next year. The bulk of that, $10 million, is for production and preservation of affordable housing. There's another tranche that's going into housing counseling, tangle title assistance, that kind of thing.
Okay.
And then there's a tranche that's going into settlement assistance. So the city historically had run a program where we did settlement grants at $500, which, as you can imagine, was not, didn't make a significant dent in the cost of purchasing a house. We were able to successfully get some dollars, additional dollars from J.P. Morgan Chase that allowed us to bump that up a little bit, but with these new trust fund dollars, we're going up to $10,000.
Okay, great.
So we're in the process of finalizing that. The parameters around that program, we have a couple different sources of funding going into that program, so we're trying to line up all the different requirements, but we should be able to roll that out in the next couple weeks.
Okay, sounds good. All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. President.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Johnson.
Thank you, Council President. I want to thank you, Ann, and your team for being here today. And just had a couple questions regarding the organizational structure on how we go about doing land disposition. And so there was recently a MOU with the land bank that was recently signed on Monday that provided support between the Vacant Property Review Committee as well as with the land bank. Can you give me an overview of the MOU, and then walk me through the process of when an individual or an organization has an interest in acquiring city-owned property, what that process looks like, and also when there are expressions of interest in one agency versus another agency, how are we making sure that all of that information is housed in one specific area so that when council members have to make decisions, right, we have all the information that's needed in front of us so we can make the best decision based upon what we're being asked to do as it relates to land disposition.
Right. So the first question is about the MOU. So essentially the MOU between the land bank and public property, and if I start to speak out of turn, I'll have Angel come up, is to allow the land bank, to allow staff to work in coordination with each other to ensure that if there's an application that comes in, that application has been reviewed for thoroughness and feasibility, and then also would require that properties that come out through VPRC, that there's a development agreement that goes along that shows what folks are going to do, what are the plans, what's the, that provides a little more teeth, I would say, than the existing agreement to ensure that folks do what they say they're going to do, and that there are clauses in there that allows us, the agencies, to recapture that property or to renegotiate that if the developer, the applicant, does not do what they say they're going to do. I mean, essentially, that's what it says in a nutshell. The second question you asked me was?
Tracking expressions of interest from one agency to another agency. What does that process look like moving forward?
Right. So one of the things that's going to happen when we are doing this consolidation is there will not be land staff at several different agencies, right? There will be land staff at one entity. They will roll up under Angel.
All
so
land staff will now be housed under the land bank?
Be housed in the PHDC, right? So the Land Bank Board exists, the Redevelopment Authority, but the employment entity is now PHDC, which means that anybody that's doing land management will be reporting up into the same accountability structure. So when an EOI comes in for any property that's publicly owned, it's going to land in the same place. The language that will go out when someone submits an EOI, if it's for a type of use that's allowed as a non-competitive sale, so a side yard, affordable housing, those kinds of things, they will get a response that says, we will respond to your request within 30 days. In that 30 days, really what happens is just kind of some initial compliance, make sure they don't have outstanding like tax violations or violations. And then within 30 days, they'll be sent a full application package. If an EOI comes in for something that is not allowed under the non-competitive sale clause, they'll get a message that says, thank you for your interest in the property. When the property comes available for sale, we would notify you. And then one of the other things we're working on is a transparent kind of tracking database that everybody, that you would have access to.
So
that
you
would
are
say
working on a database,
exactly
so
what's going on. Yes.
Will the public have access to that database?
The public will have access to a database that will that will show the property address, whether it's been bundled as a competitive sale, RP or bid. It says, and it will show what the use is, what the disposition price, and where the status of it is in the process.
So, and I'm going where Council President Clark talked about briefly. You know, a lot of times people think that we have this considerable amount of great influence over the development process. And as district council members, we do probably know what's best or the issues and concerns of our constituents because we're pretty much on the ground. But nevertheless, the Vacant Property Review Committee as well as the Land Bank is composed of administration appointees, correct?
Correct.
And council appointees, correct?
Correct.
So prior to a resolution coming to city council, I mean, and the media will call it a direct sale, there's some type of conversation with council appointees and administration prior to us receiving a resolution for us to introduce in city council, correct?
Correct.
Okay, I just want to get that on the record, just for clarity, because, you know, oftentimes when there's misinformation and we're working on behalf of our constituents, I remember a couple articles, the administration kind of took a posture as if the work that we were doing as a district council person, at least my particular case was like, well, you know, I don't know what's going on, we don't know what's happening over there, and we need to do these reforms and so forth, which I just felt was somewhat disingenuous because on that board, on both boards, sits council appointees as well as people from the administration. So if there's something really eye-opening that goes beyond ethics, and that's really a red flag, then there should be a conversation, or, you know, the proper individuals should be brought to the table and say, well, wait a minute, before we move forward on this particular resolution, you know, we have some concerns. At least that's been my experience thus far, but now we have this new MOU with the Land Bank. I want to make sure as we move forward that one, that process is thoroughly explained to the public, but as well as how that process works, where everyone can know that it's a transparent process, and here's how land is disposed here in the city of Philadelphia. Because now when I go out to community groups, you know, the typical individual wants to know, how do I go about obtaining land from the city of Philadelphia? And I want to have a fair shot at actually doing it. And so that's my time. I'll wait until the next round to ask my next additional questions.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Parker.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning to each of you. I want to just start by giving a few shout-outs over at the Planning Commission, Andrew Maloney and Larissa Clevin, for prioritizing the opportunity zones near Adams Avenue and marketing them as ideal development locations because, you know, again, you know, the further you are away from, you know, Center City, I don't think we get the same looks as other regions, and so I want to thank them for that. I also want to say a special thanks to Ian Haggerty and the Planning Commission for their support for the 9th District study of commercial corridors. It is the tool that we are using as an effort to solicit private sector support. So, you know, we're using the data to drive our ask and to seek investment into those corridors, and so I want to thank them for that. Let me start by asking you about the basic systems home repair backlog. How much of the $60 million bond issuance has been spent down?
Do they have that? Do we have the number?
And while you're searching for that information, we want to know the percentage of the backlog that has actually been cleared.
Yes, I don't have the percentage. I think we started around 8,000 cases of backlog, and I think we're down around, I want to say 1,600.
Okay.
So if you can do that math in your head,
Okay,
knock it out.
Okay,
But it's been
it.
a substantial decrease in the backlog.
Of the cases cleared, and again, you may not have this information now, but if you could just forward it to the president for circulation to all members, the percentage of individuals who've received repairs, you know, the percent who were like ultimately deemed ineligible,
Sure.
Those who you weren't able to track down, and those who were no longer interested in the program. And the reason why this data, I think, is extremely important for us to have is because when we go out into the community, it's important to know how many people in our district are benefiting from the programs being offered. So when we talk about BSRP, I want to, from a GIS perspective, be able to tell my people, oh no, you know, 3,000 people from the 9th District, you know, applied, 1,500, you know, were able to get the supports. Let me ask you, do you think that we are getting to, or that we can sort of get to a place where we'll be able to process the demands for BSRP without creating another backlog?
So I think we're getting there.
Okay.
You know, I do think we're making improvements. I think one of the key things is we are finally updating our database system that is sort of beyond dinosaur, and so that will allow us to track a lot of information in a lot more different ways and have much more accurate data that I think will really help along those lines.
Also want to just note for the record that PHDC does an outstanding job in delivering the services. And Council President Clark, I am always impressed with the number of minority-owned firms who are actually getting access to the opportunity to do that work. Yesterday, this is another issue, project information forms. As of yesterday, April the 9th, 1 year into the project information forms being officially required, if a project is residential with 4 or more units, or non-residential and it's resulting in more than 2,500 square feet of floor area, excluding the signage. When my team checked yesterday about 3:45, it appeared that there had been about 1,760 entries over the past year. Have you all done any sort of analysis of the entries to find out if there are any common themes or trends?
We have not yet.
Okay, have you surveyed any of the RCOs to see if it has in fact been a useful tool for them, and or if they, you know, sort of are making any recommendations on how it should be improved?
Councilwoman, we have not yet, no.
Okay, I just want to note for the record that that's something that my office would like to work with you on, because I think it dovetails on Councilman Johnson's line of questioning about transparency relative to the development process.
Okay.
And so we want it to be a valuable tool, and if we need to make adjustments to it, we want to be able to do so.
Yep.
Also, it was brought to my attention that you used to attach the project information forms along with the address list, and that's the list of affected RCOs like near neighbors, to the RCO notification email, and I have a copy of one here. Now, instead, you direct people to general online links that adds a few more steps or clicks in the process. I get that you're trying to streamline the process and reduce the workload on your end, but is there a way to further streamline the process on our end? Should we be doing anything different?
I think we launched that maybe a month or two ago. So
This the new notification?
yeah,
Okay,
so there isn't enough time yet to sort of see how it's working. So we're still there supporting anyone who isn't using that system, but we're trying to be more efficient and streamlined. And it allows developers even earlier access to get a lot of the information that they would normally be waiting for us to push out to them. But we can always talk about making it more efficient, and your input would be greatly valued.
Great, so please make sure you keep us updated
Will do.
on that in real time. Next, my question is relative to resources and assistance to residents or businesses. And I don't know if this is a challenge in other council districts, but in helping residents or businesses in selecting code-compliant fencing and greenery that is aesthetically pleasing and it fits into the character of the neighborhood. And so the reason why I say this is because sometimes a business and or even a private resident, they go directly to a firm because they want to put in a new fence or they want to, do some greening, some different shrubbery. But we have codes regarding the height and the type. Do we have any kind of tools that like serve as a guide so that when Sherelle Parker wants to put up a fence, look at this height, this size?
Right, so that is administered by L&I, but that's something we probably could maybe have our development services folks look at, is to just, and work with maybe the Commerce Department, because it sounds like it's around maybe corridors or something like that, about things that are just, the building code allows for, and I can't remember where it's 3 feet or 4 feet, but a 3 or 4 foot fence, and that's what you can get at Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever, and shrubbery, shouldn't be any higher than, we could probably put together some kind of a fact sheet.
Got it. Thank you. And Mr. President, I'll get to the next round of questions.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Kim.
President. Hello, good morning.
Hello.
I wanted to follow up on a few of the questions that Councilman Greenlee had asked earlier. As you know, we're very excited that we have, for the first time in our housing work, a shallow rent subsidy program. And I wanted to ask a few more questions to clarify the program a little bit. So could you talk, first of all, I think that this is a program that will have, significant beneficial impact. I'm very interested that we track it, make sure that we're seeing how effective it is, and I'm just very excited to see it going forward. So I want to thank your whole team first and foremost for making that possible. But could you talk a little bit about, I know the councilman had mentioned that you're looking at subsidies potentially up to $300. What is the total amount devoted to it, and how many families do you think that you might be able to serve? Right.
So I think what we're in the conversations, we haven't finalized the exact dollar amount because that's got to go through city council. But there is a couple million that we've proposed in the new trust fund money, and I think we're having a conversation with the existing trust fund folks about a couple million from there. So we're looking at, hopefully we have a pot of about 3 to 4 million, we think. And there's conversation about some of that money going to deepen the affordability of tax credit deals, because I don't know if you guys are keeping up to speed with this, but there's now an allowance in tax credit deals where you can do this income averaging thing, which means that actually there'll be more probably tax credit units that are at a higher median income, and so that we think that those projects may need some assistance to really be able to serve lower income folks. And then the other thing we're looking at is providing the assistance to families that are, or households that are in what's considered naturally occurring affordable housing, which means it's not got any kind of federal or local or any kind of state subsidy or public subsidy dollars in it, but it's available on the open market at what is considered kind of a reasonable rent, but it's sort of just a little bit out of the reach of a lot of our households. And as I mentioned in the study by the Federal Reserve, it turns out that that differential is about $300. So there's going to be a combination. We are still working, we're trying to work through the program. We don't have a program, so it's not like we can just expand on what we have. So we're trying to figure this out and how it will roll out. But that's kind of the parameters. We had talked about trying to provide it for a year, but we don't want to be in a situation where somebody has it for a year and then we say, oh, we got to take it back, and that displaces a person, right? So we're trying to work through some of those issues.
And for clarity, you know, for folks who aren't familiar with it or maybe watching, this was some of the work that we came out of our anti-eviction task force discussing. It's a new program, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so it's a new program that will help families potentially, depending on income, and we have to do a lot more work around it, meet rent, because it would be easier and potentially cheaper for the city to help them figure out a subsidy program where we can help them meet rent, rather than see them evicted and then go into a $40,000 a year shelter system. Is
Exactly.
that an
Exactly.
accurate
I mean,
depiction?
do the math, right? $300 a month times 12 months is $3,600. It's going to be very difficult to find a more cost-effective way to keep people in their homes than $3,600.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And do you know how many cities around the country have some form of this program?
I don't know the number.
Do you know
I
which
there are a
models that
handful,
you look at?
So that is within the best practice research that the consultant team did that we used on the housing action plan. So we have that information. I don't have it memorized off the top of my
No,
head,
that's
but
no
we
problem.
do have access to that.
And it's something certainly that we championed on the anti-eviction task force. And again, I'm really excited to see
Yeah,
it.
I should just mention that the Office of Supportive Housing has run what they call a shallow rent program for a while, but it's a much deeper rent. It's, I think, upwards of $600. We're not looking to duplicate that or kind of usurp that. We're really trying to figure out how we meld those and be able to provide kind of a continuum of assistance.
And have you thought about how the resources target particular populations? So for example, one of the things that we're concerned about are families who might be separating, you know, so like children from their parents because or barriers to reunification due to housing. So we certainly don't want children removed from their families because their families don't have permanent housing. But we know that that's an issue that's been moving through DHS. So has there been some thought about whether there's targeting towards families like that or youth aging out of foster care, which is one of our highest populations of young people, of individuals who might be extremely vulnerable to homelessness in our city?
Yeah, we're certainly open to having those discussions as we put the program together.
Okay. And you said that some of this work is being coordinated with the rental assistance programs that are operating through OHS. So not to be duplicative, but to be complementary or to reach a broader swath
Exactly.
of people. Is that right?
Exactly.
Okay. And then I think you mentioned this a little bit, but are you still, what is the current thinking about the eligibility for this program?
So I think we're looking at that. Again, you know, what we're seeing in the numbers is this would help families at around 50%. So I think that, you know, that would be probably the naturally occurring piece that we try to look at. And then as far as the kind of deeper assistance to folks that may be in an existing tax credit unit or something like that, we're hoping that we can get to a little bit deeper affordability than that. We're also having conversations with PHA about potentially matching this with their ACCs as well. So I think exact income levels is sort of still to be determined, but particularly in that subsidized realm, we're trying to get as deep into that income affordability as we can.
And do you have a sense of the numbers? How many people are we talking about?
So, you know, sort of if you take $4 million and you divide it by, let's say,
I mean, in terms of
$400?
eligibility.
Yeah.
What numbers are we talking about in terms of eligibility? Not those that we can actually pay for, but in
Okay.
terms of like what is the population that might,
So the population that.
scale of it.
So we know that we have probably, I do know this, give me a second, I have it here. I would say, so where we are, we have a deficit of affordable rental units for those making at 50% of median or below of about 41,000 units. And for those at 30% or below, it's about 70,000. So we will make a little bit of a dent,
Yeah.
but I think what that really points out is it's going to be very hard
That's
for
right.
any locality anywhere to take this issue on their own.
yeah, by ourselves. I
Yes.
agree with you. I mean, I think that this is an important step forward. And
Yeah.
again, like a lot of the work that we're trying to do, from the Legal Defense Fund to piloting this, and it is an investment, like it's not a small, insufficient sum, but this piloting of investment is helping us understand the scale of, so that as we go out and talk to other entities, including corporate, our businesses, corporate actors, some of our universities and others, that we are clear what the scale of need is, and that we as a city cannot do it alone, and that we need state level resources, we need the federal government involved, and we need our corporate actors, because if it is true that housing almost more than anything else defines poverty, ensures poverty. If there's not a roof over somebody's head, it's going to be hard to hang on to a job. It's going to be hard to hang on to a family. It's going to be hard to put food on the table or guarantee any of that stuff. Then we have to centralize it. We have to get a sense of what the scale is. And then we have to drive folks together to build the coalition that can help us win.
Yeah, well, I also think, it's interesting to point out in this study that really the disparity between what people pay and what they can afford is $300 to $600. So that points to,
That's right.
this is a plug for something totally different, but why we need to support a higher minimum wage.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Bass.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Welcome.
Good morning.
Morning,
How are you?
I'm okay.
Good, good. So I just had a few questions for you, and let me just start by saying that it's really, we have good relationships with all of our different city agencies, but we have a great relationship with yours as well, and I just really wanted to acknowledge that. I know I've called you a number of times in a panic about a number of different things, and every time planning has really come through strongly for the 8th District. And so I just really wanted to say to you and all of your staff and Greg and Mary Frances, is Mary Frances here? Mary Frances Fogg, and to everyone, thank you for working with us and for the work that you do. We really do appreciate it. And,
Thank you.
And Greg is usually on the hot seat and the firing line all at one time, particularly around Germantown settlement property. So I'm wondering if you could start there and just give me an update as to what's happening to this very complicated transaction. If you could just give an update for anyone who may be, at home listening, and also for my information as well.
Sure. Thank you, Councilwoman. Sure. Greg Heller, Director of the Redevelopment Authority. So as you know, the Redevelopment Authority put these loans in default, and we're seeking to take possession of about 45 buildings that were under these loans and mortgages through foreclosure. We also recently started pursuing a second route to obtain possession through the bankruptcy court. It's too early to tell which approach will be faster. So that's why we're taking both approaches at the same time, and whichever one seems to be faster, that's the one that we're going to go with. But as you know, it's a long and complicated process to take possession through either of those routes, and we're doing everything we can and spending a lot of time and resources to get those properties back into our possession as quickly as possible, while doing everything we can to protect the tenants. As you know, the court appointed PHA as the receiver to serve as the property manager, and we're working closely with PHA to making sure that they're keeping those units in good repair and taking care of those tenants in any way that we can. We'd like to get this resolved as quickly as I'm sure you would as well.
Oh, absolutely. And as you know, the residents are very interested and all things that are happening with those properties, because it's been such a, we didn't get here yesterday. There's been a lot of things that have happened, much to the, disagreement to the public, who have been fighting to, get these properties, well maintained, that there's no misspending that's been allowed, that these are properties that will house people who are in desperate need of housing in a section of in some sections of Germantown that are possibly on the verge of gentrification. And so it's very important that these units stay in the community. It's my opinion that they should stay as affordable or low-income housing units, because we need to, stake that claim for the community. It's very, very important that we do so. So, again, I thank you all for the work that you've been doing on that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Just a couple of other things. Civic design review. So we've seen a number of instances where there are community meetings, civic design review community meetings, that are required by the code, but they don't go very well because the neighbors think that these are projects that are requiring variances, and when it's actually a by right project, and it's an opportunity to bring the community in. But I think because it's not really clear as to the purpose of the meeting or what is expected out of the meeting, folks come in thinking that they can have an opportunity to change something that they do not have an opportunity to change. And so are there any plans to revamp civic design reviews process to ease the confusions by neighbors who think that CDR community meetings are actually zoning meetings when the votes are taking place? So is there any thought to that? Is this just something that's happening in my neck of the woods, or is this something citywide, or?
Yeah, the Planning Commission, I think CDR has been a process, been in effect for about 5 years, and they are taking a look at that. There was some preliminary information released. We are taking a deeper dive into that about why some of the things that came out in the preliminary report are actually happening. To get a better understanding of it. And I think as part of that process, a piece of it will be about how things are communicated around what CDR is, what it isn't. And so I think, the answer to your question is yes, that's going to be part of looking at the whole CDR process.
I think it could be as simple as developing like a flyer or something that as soon as folks are entering into the room, that they get this piece of information that says this is the purpose of a civic design review meeting. This is what can happen. This is not what will not happen. Just to lay the expectations out as soon as people enter, so that there is no expectation, I'm going to vote this project down.
And I think we are looking at that kind of across the board, is how do we communicate things in a sort of simpler, accessible way, because reading code is not simple and accessible.
I would agree. Another question, contracts. And I don't know that you have this information readily available, but just looking at your budget summary and in Class 200, the purchase of services. One of the things that I've been looking at is contracts with the City of Philadelphia and how we are delegating contracts, where they're going. And if we are serious about addressing poverty in the City of Philadelphia, we have this anti-poverty agenda. It's my feeling that we can't keep talking about poverty, and then when it comes to wealth building, which a lot of these contracts have an opportunity to do, or at least maintaining some level of wealth here in the City of Philadelphia or in the region, we cannot continue to allow so many of our contracts to be held far and away outside of the City of Philadelphia. And I also noticed that, in talking to small business folks who say that they are unable to get contracts here in the City of Philadelphia, that they're doing work in Boston and New Jersey and Florida and DC and Maryland and every place else except for their own hometown, that for whatever reason they're just kind of X'd out. These are minority contracts. These are women-owned businesses contracts. And so I'd like to get a sense of what those contracts are in your Class 200 and where the entity is based, so that we can take a look at that and in the future, hope to be helpful as these contracts and things come up for renewal. I've had an opportunity to just recently see a contract that was relatively small by the City of Philadelphia, about $500,000, and it was going to an outfit based in Chicago. And I just couldn't understand why that was. Why is it something, all of the, companies that we have here that could do this type of work were not consulted, and rather than doing a new RFP, it was, well, it seemed to me that the department was saying, well, this is easier. And you have to do what's not so easy if we're going to have a change and an impact overall on what happens here in the city's economy. Easy is short term. The hard stuff, harder stuff, changing those contracts to locally based providers is longer term. And for the longer term benefit of the city of Philadelphia, I think it's something that we have to do.
Yeah.
So
We don't have a lot of Class 200 contracts, to be honest with you, but we will certainly look at the ones we have, because
Okay.
we agree on minority and local hiring as well. And I think, where we do most of the predominant amount of our contracting is through our home repair programs, where we do a really substantial job around small minority local contractors.
okay, if you could get that information to Mr. President, that'd be
Yes.
great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Johnson.
Thank you, Council President. So I just want to follow up on my question regarding land disposition as we move forward. City of Philadelphia making sure that this process is great for everyone and it's transparent, and we're doing what we need to do to be efficient on behalf of the people in which we represent. So moving forward, for sales to private developers, the default process will be competitive bidding, correct?
Competitive sales. So competitive
sales.
sale can either take the form of a bid, or it could be a RFQ or RFP.
RFQ or RFP. So let's just talk about the appraisal process, right? Explain it to me, and then give me an idea of, is the appraisal value going to be at the start of the expression of interest, or when the transaction is approved before the legislation is introduced, or when the person actually goes to settlement with the city of Philadelphia? Because there's like and all this is to try to help the public understand, because it's very complex. And the public will get a story that says developer receives property way under land value, school district of Philadelphia is robbed out of their money, when the public doesn't know that this person might apply 2-3 years ago, and just for reasons not of their own, finally go through the process and actually receive the approval and the sale transaction to receive the property. That value of that land may have tripled over that time period, which we know it's not the fault of the developer, but it's a process. Can you explain that, just for the record, please, and how we're going to fix it moving forward?
Right. So we are working on clarifying this and making it very, very clear. So one thing is, I want to make it clear, an expression of interest is not an application for a property. The expression of interest.
Say it again for the record.
Right. Expression of interest is exactly that. I'm interested in this property. Okay? So what would happen is, if a property is, we're going to talk about competitive sale. So something goes out for competitive sale, either a bid or an RFP. Once somebody is selected, they will, they have 30 days, that we said, to do an application. So once somebody is selected, there's about 30 days to complete an application. And then what happens then, once somebody provides a signed completed application, there's then a clock starts ticking of 120 days. And that's to give the agencies time to put together the formal project development or redevelopment agreement. Part of that agreement will be an offer price that will be determined either by an appraiser or an in-house appraiser that we have. So the value would be determined at that point. So within 120 days of the approved application package, they would then get the formal agreement, and in that agreement is the offer price. They would then have 60 days to sign that, right? So, and then we're going to hold that price for a year. And so in that year, they have the ability to go through all the various boards and approval processes, and also start getting their permits in place. Typically, prior to settlement, we require the zoning permit to be in place. That can be a lengthy process, but we're going to make it clear that we will hold that price for a year, and if they can't get to settlement in that year, that then we reserve the right to renegotiate. It is really not possible or fair to a developer to say that at the day before or a week before settlement, we're going to readjust the price. So we're going to agree to hold it for a year. I just want to clarify that for the land bank, that per the land bank legislation, that bid or RFPs must include a base price in that document that's established by the appraiser or the in-house opinion of value, and that opinion of value would also be determined by someone who is a certified appraiser.
Thank you. And one last part, how will you promote the bidding opportunity to ensure that all potential bidders can participate?
Right. So,
Everyone knows that this is fair game. Everybody have an opportunity to participate in the bidding process. And also, a major concern that I've been hearing when I've been going to community meetings is that in areas where we see hypergentrification, you have maybe 1 or 2 or 3 key developers who are dominating the market through the bidding process. Like they have the wherewithal, they have the trust funds, they have the investors, the financial backings to win, right? How does the little guy participate in that process? Like, as representatives of government, do we let the market just move forward and those individuals who have the most investment dollars are okay to just run away with dominating the market when it comes to just development, period? But specifically, issues I deal with are around gentrification. How does that get balanced in this process as well, or not at all?
okay, so a couple things to unpack there.
Just
One
2
is,
components.
right, well, one is, if you submit an expression of interest, you would get notified when that property comes out for either bid or RFQ, RFP. So that's one way
So
of
you'll get
notification.
the information.
Yeah.
Okay.
The other way is it will be publicly posted on our websites for 30 days, so that people are aware that it's up there.
And what website is that?
Yes.
What
Oh,
website?
well, right now, it will be posted on the PRA, PHDC, Land Bank, and Department of Planning and Development, but again, as we consolidate, it'll be the website. Right. And then, in terms of who can be the successful developer applicant, I just want to make it clear that bids or the whole competitive sale is not just about highest price. There are a number of factors looked at, which is developer capacity, proposed use, community benefit, minority participation. There's a host of things. It's not just about price. And we can have that conversation, particularly in areas that are experiencing certain types of development pressures. Do we want to put out in the RFP that, we are going to have a preference for mixed income housing or something like that? We can have those conversations. So I just want to make clear that competitive sale doesn't mean highest bid.
I'm glad you said that for the record. And just one last component. When we talk about the sale of land, right, what role does the city play in terms of, I know the market, let's say in gentrifying areas such as Point Breeze and Grays Ferry, right, a lot may go for $100,000, right? Now, we know how the private market works, right? But can we are we allowed to have a say-so on maybe capping that value of land, right? Or do we have a say-so in how much that land can be sold for? Because when we talk about gentrification, if you're selling a lot for $1,000, right, we already know you're building that house for $500. We know you're selling it for at least $500 because you got to make that money back, right? So, because we're talking about city-owned land. And so I get challenged at a meeting saying, well, Councilman, if the city is selling lots for $100,000, the city is participating in the gentrification process because the lots that you're selling are going to developers who automatically want to build at a certain price point. They make their money back. So can you kind of educate me on, do we have a say-so on that process, or the land value just automatically has to be significantly high because of the value of properties that are going up in the area, in a certain area?
Right, so I just want to clarify, the last one is also the land bank requires actual posting at the site when something's up for competitive sale. In terms of value, so we already have a program, the workforce housing program, where we offer properties at a discounted price if the developer agrees to provide a unit at an affordable price for a certain period of years. So again, if we're offering something particularly through an RFP or something, we can put those sort of guardrails with you,
And I've done,
if you will.
I've done several of those.
Yeah,
yes.
you can put those in your process, and also we reserve the right to negotiate the value of the property if there is a community benefiting component, such as affordable housing or something like that.
All right, thank you. That's my time. Thank you, Council President, for
Thank
your
you.
latitude.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Reynolds Brown.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning. I am not a district council person, but I pay close attention to concerns raised by district council members, particularly around this issue, because I get it as well in various spaces. And so Councilman Kenyatta Johnson has spoken to the nuance of this issue, which is unfair, quite frankly, to indigenous business developers from their local communities who want to participate in the growth and development of the blocks where they've been born from. And so his premise was, do you agree or disagree with Councilman Kenyatta Johnson's premise that government may be participating in gentrification given the way you currently structure the sale of land?
I disagree.
And share with us why.
I disagree, as just what I mentioned. We offer land for a discounted price for people that are doing some kind of affordable mixed income housing. We also
You said for affordable or mixed income?
mixed income, so,
Okay.
so it would be a proportional, right? If you're going to do 100% affordable, that's a deeper discount than if you say you're only doing 10%,
Okay.
right? Something like that.
All right.
We offer it for business expansion. We offer it for side yards, community gardens, or kind of a community benefiting use, which is a little bit more expansive, daycare, rec center, library, something, community center, something like that. So we do provide the ability to have discounted pricing for things that are from a community benefit to some extent, right?
Okay.
As far as if we are selling property and it would be for a totally market rate use, very rarely is it that that the city is selling something in advance of the market. We may be selling it at whatever is the market value, but it's the market that's setting that value. It's not the city coming in and saying, all the market rate lots around it are $50,000 and we're gonna sell ours for twice that.
Okay.
It would be at the market. So I don't think that we necessarily promote gentrification as that. I mean, our policies are really about how do we provide our land at a discount so that we can help support other types of development that aren't necessarily market rate or pushing them.
Okay. How well do you believe we do as a city in informing, educating indigenous, because I'm only concerned about one group here, folks from Mantua, okay, folks from Point Breeze who have been born there, stayed there, raised their families there, are business owners there, and now want to benefit from what we're discussing. How well are we doing at helping them understand that if your idea of building is going to generate subsequent kind of business development, then here's what the city can provide?
Yeah, I think we have a lot of room for improvement.
Okay.
I think we are doing things, we're trying to, as I said, across the board, we're looking at how we get the word about our programs out there. How do we do community engagement? How do we get that information out there? And are we getting that information out there in a way that's easily understandable?
Sure.
So we've been going through, frankly, as part of our work with the opportunity zones, we put together a one-pager for residents that say, these are the things that can help you stay in your community. We've got a one-pager for businesses. We're happy to share this with you. Same thing. This is how you can, these are the things that the city provides or their government supports that help you stay in your community.
Okay.
I think And just as a total anecdotal thing, I was at a community meeting about something completely different, and at the end, a bunch of the residents came up to me with their property tax bills. And said, you know, we can't afford to, but we need help. And in their tax bill, they brought with them that sheet from revenue that lists the, 6 programs, 8 programs, whatever it was. And it was too hard for them to figure out which one.
I see.
Right, so I think we took that back to say, you know what, we need to do a better job of getting the information out there and then making sure that it's easy for folks to understand what that is and that we're providing the backup support so that folks can, so if they have questions, they have someone to go to, and that's the impetus behind something that we're doing called, I think it's called direct benefits now. It started out as one form, where we're trying to get to a point, and OIT has taken this effort over, where residents can go online, fill out a list of like 10 questions, and it pops up. These are all the programs that could be of assistance. We're hoping at some point that we get to a time where you fill out the 10 questions like TurboTax, and all your applications are filled out and you're automatically enrolled in those programs. We're not there. It's going to take us a while to get there, but there is funding in next year's budget for us to take that next step, which is, you answer these 10 questions or whatever it is, and these are all the programs that would be applicable to your situation.
That's a great vision that you have, and I certainly appreciate that. Aside from this issue, what I am observing across city departments, the millennials and some baby boomers, but definitely not folks in their 80 and 90s, get all of what you're talking about. And I will say ad nauseum, we're leaving seniors behind who end up in circumstances as described by Councilman Kenyatta Johnson. And we as a government have to do better in figuring out how we connect with senior citizen centers who are up close and personal with seniors. CDCs may have a role in this. For sure, the Philadelphia Corporation of Aging have a role in this. But it's seniors who are, your heart breaks when you hear them come in here and hear them losing their homes because of gentrification and the taxes rising, above, and they're drowning because of increased taxes. So that's just an observation I've made across government. We get an F when it comes to looking out for seniors.
Yeah, I will say that our home repair grant predominantly we serve seniors.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay, so back to Councilman Kenyatta Johnson's question. Indigenous residents who become business people and developers who want to stay there. Do you know if other municipalities might have, for lack of a better word, a tax credit for indigenous folk who live there, been born there, raised their families there, stayed there, now want to do business with our government around development? I'm just asking.
Yeah, I'm thinking. I don't know of one off the top of my head. And I don't know exactly what form that tax credit would take.
Me either.
But I think what you're really asking is, could we figure out some sort of way to incentivize sort of smaller local minority?
Yes. So that I would like us to think about that.
Okay.
Because we do a disservice to, and actually we reward those who come from New York, quite frankly, and benefit on the backs of folks who stayed in their communities because they want to see their communities thrive.
Sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilwoman. A real quick follow-up to the last round of questions. And I understand know that there was an executive order on land disposition policy recently put out on city-owned properties, and it talked about affordability, some of the other aspects of some of the exemptions that were put in as it relates to competitive bidding. And there was actually, I guess, an acknowledgement or an inclusion about participation rate for disadvantaged employees or workers, but there was nothing to talk about disadvantaged small business people from the local community that would give weight to the disposition. And just to be frank, I hear all the time, small contractors, minority contractors, particularly in those areas like the brewery towns, the Point Breezes, and all those other, significantly growth neighborhoods, their ability to purchase publicly owned land is virtually nil because of the price of the land. And the only way that they can be in a position to get a parcel of land is if they agree to do affordable housing. And, you know, that's a challenge in terms of being able to do workforce housing. The profit margin is slim. So what can we do to create a level playing field? Because the simple reality is, as the councilman just said, we have people from New York, we have people from, I don't know where they're from, but they're coming in with a whole lot of cash and they're buying up property. I had one person in my district, I'm not going to say his name here, I had no idea. This person owns like 100 lots right in the heart of North Philadelphia, and just quietly they purchased lots. And the simple reality is it's clear they had a wherewithal to pay whatever. And it creates an uneven playing field for a number of small contractors who said, just want to buy one lot and build a house, right? And be able to take advantage of the market just like everybody else. So how do we fix that? You know, how do we create, and either through the quote unquote indirect sales, which used to be in place, I'm understanding now that's a problem, but it gave some ability to give, you know, sell properties indirectly to local contractors.
Yeah, so I think that's something we should probably have a conversation about that, about how we could incorporate that maybe into some of the scoring criteria, whatever are the criteria in the bid package or the RFP or RFQ that we're putting out, is how we want to incorporate something like that. I think
You said we're having a conversation about it?
yeah, I think, well, let's have that conversation about it and try to figure out how we can accomplish that.
But you know, I mean, you realize that's a problem.
Yeah,
And when there's any attempt to try to create a level playing field, there's a significant level of criticism because everything should be competitively bid. And
Well, again, I think
if
that's
the
a
real
com-
world
yeah,
was as
right.
simple as that, then you would say, okay, but the real world is that people's ability to get access to capital, just not the same. Just not
Totally,
the same
yeah,
for whatever reason.
yeah.
I'm not blaming
Yeah.
anybody or giving a basis for it. But I don't understand how people I've never seen before can essentially come in and they come in the office and they say, well, I own all these properties. I said, well, never saw it. Where did this person get this money to buy all these properties in the neighborhood? And yet, when I go out in the neighborhood, because I'm always out there talking to people, and the contractors walk up to me and say, Darryl, you know, I'd love to get one of these houses. Guy that's been doing work forever in the neighborhood. I just don't have $100,000 to buy the lot and then build the house. I mean, you know, this is just, something needs to be done with this, right? And, you know, within the bounds of our requirements, but at the end of the day, this whole competitive bid issue is not competitive because the playing field is never competitive as long as people with external capital can continue to access that capital and those that who have not been in a position to do it will never be able to do it. So it'll never level that playing field. So I'm glad to hear that you all acknowledge that that's a problem and we're going to figure out a way to work on that.
Yes.
All right? Thank you. And not on the councilwoman's time, but I know the councilwoman Park had asked a question about basic systems repair program. I understand we now have a representative from PHDC here, the status of that.
Oh, yeah.
If we can briefly speak to the specifics of where we are, and this won't go in your time, Councilwoman, you're up next. You're up next.
Question for backlog and spending. Say your name for the.
There was a question about the status of the basic systems repair program, grant program, where we were, where we started with the backlog, and how many people on the backlog had been finished, and then will we be in a position once this backlog is cleared, will we be able to sustain the pace as it relates to new entries into the process? Because I know we get around, what, $11 million a year under block grant dollars?
Yes.
Yeah, so can you just speak to that real quick?
Yes.
Respond to
So
Councilwoman.
for the record, David Thomas, Executive Director, Philadelphia Housing Development Corporation. First question related to bond spend down in the backlog. As of February 2019, our numbers are at approximately 1,500 folks remaining in some phase to be completed. And we've completed roughly 2,300 over the beginning period to now. So that's a total of a little under 4,000 folks for the backlog, which is what we anticipated the numbers were in the beginning. In terms of proceeding forward and being able to keep up with the 11 million, I believe is what you asked me, correct? And
That's your job.
the regular funding, right. I will say that the demand will suggest that $11 million will probably not be enough to keep up with the demand
Okay.
as it's been in the past.
Okay. So we may fall,
$60 million spend down, we are a little under $30 million spent to date. I haven't seen my numbers this week. And we anticipate, I have roughly 12 million in the pipeline right now, in those various stages, and at least 10 million people or $10 million worth of expressions that we have not necessarily moved on yet.
all right. And there was we actually had a community meeting last night. It was a question about timeline in terms of inquiry from the recipient to when work actually gets done, and the representative from your office said it was about a year. People were like, well, it's a long time, and the statement was that there were some concerns about contractors being able to access, have enough contractors to keep up with the pace, because there was a lot of money put on the street, which wasn't anticipated. Is that an issue?
So the biggest challenge that we have is with the plumbers. And most of my work that we have out here on the street is related to plumbing.
Okay.
So that is part of the delay that you're making reference to in terms of 12 months. My other trades are much quicker than the plumbers at the moment because they have the capacity to keep up with the demand.
Okay.
The plumbing is the most challenging for me right now.
We have a game plan for that?
I do have some game plans. I certainly have an RFP out there today trying to solicit additional contractors. I actually had a situation where I introduced the plumbers to certain vocational schools to try to see if we can create a feeder system to provide some support for capacity, and that was received very well. As a
We
matter
had something up in the Northeast last week.
that was the first one. I've been working with multiple vocational schools.
You're going to have one down in West and North and other areas South.
I'm going to have conversations with all the vocational schools to see where
All
the
right.
capacity possibly can be addressed. Absolutely.
Okay, all right, thank you. Councilwoman, you good on you good? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Thomas.
Yes, sir.
Chair recognizes Councilwoman Parker.
Before you go, you weren't here when I started with the questioning, but I noted for the record the outstanding job that you do with BSRP and also with ensuring that minority contractors get access to the opportunity to do that work. When we kicked off the program, Mr. President, if you remember, we kicked off the program in the 9th District in Alany, near where Congressman Boyle grew up, and in the backdrop, it was the firm actually doing the work. And let me tell you, it was a breath of fresh air to see African-American men who grew up in Alany, back in Alany doing work. And so I just wanted to commend you on the record for that.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure. And my next question, and this is a very brief one, I want to go back. You had mentioned this, the federal opportunity zones. Can you give us an update relative to your progress on creating a website that essentially pitches opportunity zones in Philadelphia to developers and investors? And give us an update on the status of the federal regs for opportunity zones. And I know it's pretty crazy down there right now, but just do the best you can.
So I'll take the easier one of those, the website. So if folks go to philadelphiadelivers.com, which is the city's general website around business attraction, there is a tab on the right-hand side that says Opportunity Zones. If you click on that, it will take you to our effort to market the opportunity zones. On that is a map that shows the city of Philadelphia as a whole, that shows where all the opportunity zones are. If you click on any of those census tracts, some basic demographic information pops up. There's then another piece, if you scroll down, that's about incentives. So you could type in an address and it would say whether that location is eligible for, well, we have the 10-year tax abatement in KOZ. Some of the bigger ones are on the front page, but if you type in an address, it'll say it's in a community investment neighborhood, or it's in a new market tax credit eligible neighborhood. It would say all the other things that an investor or developer may be able to take advantage of. And then if you continue to scroll down, there's something about highlight areas. And the areas that we highlighted are dispersed around the city, and we tried to target areas that developers and investors may not identify on their own as areas of Philadelphia that would be ripe for development, or where development or capital could have an impact. And then in addition, and so for example, you pointed out the Adams Avenue one, we have one there, and so there's kind of a map that you scroll down and it shows what the potential is, and on the left-hand side, we've also identified what the goals are for investment that we would like to see achieved in those areas. And again, they range from affordable housing, mixed income housing, low moderate income job creation. In some areas, there's a specific focus on daycare because there's a dearth of early childhood opportunities there, fresh food access, those kinds of things. We are in the process of working with developers and investors to populate a map that would identify projects, that someone could click on the dot on the map and the information about the project and who to contact if you're interested would pop up. We are hoping that should the federal regulations come out anytime soon, we're hearing that Treasury is reviewing something, so that usually means that we're about 30 days away. We hope that's true, but we don't have a definite, that those regs will clarify things around small business investment, and that when that becomes clear, we can also provide information about opportunities to invest in small businesses as well.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Keona Sanchez. Sorry about that, Councilwoman.
I was happy to hear that I was late that Ann has agreed that they're ready for the total consolidation of land disposition. Is that right?
We're getting there, yes.
Okay, awesome. I have a couple of items that we've talked about, and as much as, you know, the executive order tries to parcel out side lots, which you know are my priority. One of the questions that still remains for me is, particularly now as we move to responding to people on time, is what is the resistance of the administration to allow folks to buy this land that now may be worth a lot more money at the rate which they would have bought it at the time they applied when the system worked? Like we keep having this discussion because I think one of the discrepancies between people feeling they have access is, I've been waiting for 10 years. Why can't we just give those long-term residents the land at the value of, if the system worked, they would have acquired it? What's the resistance?
So I wouldn't say there's resistance. I would say that that's something, you know, that we're in conversations with your office about, is particularly in communities where property values have risen, and the community or the adjacent owner has been taking care of the property for a long time. How we facilitate the transfer of that property to them at a reasonable rate, but then also ensure that that continues to be used as a side yard or a rear yard, as opposed to then sold to the New York developer who comes down and can pay $100,000, right? So I think that's the conversation we're having. I feel like we're pretty close, and that hopefully that we can sort of dot the I's, cross the T's, and get that underway shortly, because we recognize that that's an issue. And I think, you know, anytime we try to do sort of these holistic policy fixes, there's always something that pops up and says, well, it doesn't work here, it doesn't work here. And so I think that's what we're working through, is how do we make this as workable as possible for as many areas as possible, but understand when those specific cases pop up that we need to be nimble enough to address those.
I think that that would send a huge message to this issue about who has access, right? And you know how strongly I feel about it, because you know how strongly I'm against this competitive bid. We could be transparent and not create this scenario of competitive bidding for folks who have been in the neighborhood waiting for a long time. And so being able to clarify all of the waiting list, people who've been processed, all of those things, and sending a message that you've been taking care of it for 10 years, we messed up, OPA said 10 years ago this was the value, deed restricted. I don't think we need to overthink this. I think sometimes we really overthink things. Deed restricted, and period. Let's move on, and let's because there's I have 400, on the waiting list of this stuff, of people who've been waiting since before I got elected. So how close do you think, when you say we're close, because I've been hearing that for a minute, how close are we to doing?
We're very close, very, very, very close. We got
Before the end of the
we got
budget?
another meeting set up in, I want to say the end of this month, 2 weeks, and I think we should be pretty much ready to go after that.
The other issue, as you know, and I know that we're getting closer to really having a conversation about U.S. Bank and the 5,000 encumbered properties all over the city, the 1,358 of them in my district. One of the other issues that has arisen with this new executive order is the issue of people needing to have 75% of the land assembled before we would move the parcels. We sent a message to folks that if they were acquiring parcels and the city had parcels, that we were going to put them out the door, right? And in some cases, there's PHA properties that have a whole other different issue. Who came up with this 75%? And if someone just has an adjacent parcel, I have a longtime resident on the 4200 block of 9th Street that went to sheriff's sale, acquired some properties, and now I'm being told that because he doesn't have 75% of the parcels, he has to go to competitive bidding.
All right,
Who comes up with this stuff?
So that was I would say, a decision by committee that, as we talked
Is this
about.
a NASA committee? Did you guys set up another committee I'm unaware of?
As we talked about with the side yard issue, this is another thing that is getting rectified and is on that 2-week time frame.
Is on that 2-week time frame. I think that's another place where we've told people, go acquire on sheriff's sale, and we've tried to push the sheriff's sale as much as possible. But this notion of 75%, who comes up with those numbers? Where do they come up?
I think we acknowledge that we could have much more functional disposition policies, and that's what we're working with the council offices towards.
Okay, 2 weeks, all right. Quickly, what has been the utilization so far around the mixed income housing bonus, and how do you see us, in addition to the mixed income housing and the new money with shallow rents and others, how do you see us getting to that deeper level subsidy for folks?
Yeah, so a couple things on that. So we have, under the old mixed income policy, we have 3 developers that had taken advantage of that. One paid the money, one did the units, and one is about to start construction, and they will be putting the units on site. Under the revised policy, I think we're having a conversation with 6 developers. They're not all quite far along, but I think it's a combination of the money and the units on site. So, but we have more information. We can get you an actual table that talks about that. As far as the deeper affordability, we talked a little bit about, we think kind of our best bang for the buck around that, particularly around rental housing, is the shallow rent piece. How do we make existing subsidized units maybe a little deeper affordability, and how do we make sure that folks that are just shy of being able to afford sort of naturally occurring affordable housing and can be able to afford that? And so I think that's where we're targeting right now, but again, we're happy to continue a conversation we're interested in leaving no stone unturned.
Okay. And then finally, as you know, I have an interest, and we have something pending around trying to create some sort of committee on opportunity zone. I really, really believe, and I was in a workshop a couple of weeks ago with BizNow, and was really concerned about how folks think that council is the stumbling block with some of this development, particularly as it relates around land use and other things. Can we get to a place where there is a council, administration, and maybe some folks from the outside sitting around the table and looking at what are the benefits as the regulations evolve, and then what are some of the challenges, so that there's more clarity around our role? You know, go into a panel where people are like, we're the problem. I think I did a pretty good job of saying
I
we're
was going to
not
say,
the
maybe
problem.
we should sit next to each other sometime so we could both be the problem.
I think the issue of, you know, and I'm not bashful in saying to folks, you know, if you make smart investments that the community needs, people are welcoming you. If you're going to come in here and just park money and make money, you're going to have a problem. I don't see a problem with that. They do, right? But how close are we to, like, the need to kind of put people around the table? Because I really would want to set up some sort of work group. I think the council president's tech staff and some of the data sets that they did is important, but really figuring out what are the opportunities outside the traditional Schuylkill Farms and the Naval Yard. You know, what are some real opportunities where we can tell folks, this is what we want to see in here, right? I keep telling folks, communities have spoken. There's great community plans about what the amenities they'd like to see in their district. How do we get that information out to this business community so we link it up better and they stop looking at us as the obstacle? My fear is that they're setting up all these structures independent of us, right? And saying, we're going to do what we need to do, and really not engage community folks. And that's a problem, because that's where the them versus us kind of.
All right. Yeah. No, I mean, I think we're open to having that, and I think as far as the timing question is, it's probably pretty soon. Even though we don't have regs, we know that investment's happening, and we know that this is a little bit tricky program, right? Because it's not really a program. It's a tax break for private capital equity investment. And so and right now, there's no reporting or anything required. So this could be going on and we'd have no idea that it's technically an opportunity zone investment, which is why, you know, we've tried to put out, these are the things we're looking for. If you're coming to us for some kind of relief on something, we're going to ask you about what are you doing about this, what are you doing about that. But how we kind of visualize what is exactly the things we're looking for, I think that would be a good exercise. We have sat around the table with the CDC kind of development practitioners. I think, again, this isn't a program per se, it's a tax break for private equity. And so what this doesn't do is it's not subsidy, right? It doesn't take a project that needs a significant amount of subsidy and make it work. What it does is it takes either a project that might have been on the edge and now it may be on the it works side, or takes a project that was pretty good and makes it better. So I think that we should be having those conversations.
Thank you, Mr. President. You used up more than my time.
Thank you, Council Lady. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Gimm.
Thank you very much, Council President. So the School District of Philadelphia is embarking on probably in a long time, its most robust effort to revitalize public schools, to get real abatements going in for lead, asbestos, and mold. There's got to be a good conversation not only about school modernization, but school construction. Are you, in your discussions with the Opportunity Zone development work, is the school district part of all of that? And how are they aligning some of their investments to make sure that, you know, as we develop out these opportunity zones, that in fact the local public school is seeing a significant investment for the families that we're trying to anchor there, for the communities that we're trying to benefit as well?
Yeah, so I think there's some of that conversation going on through the mayor's office. I think, again, what's tricky is this is not subsidy money. And in order for the project or investment to qualify, you have to give up ownership. And so I don't know, I think they're trying to talk through, is there a structure whereby basically the school district would have to cede ownership for a portion of the time? So it's complicated, but there is a discussion going on. I think it's complicated.
I mean, corporations can get tax credits, right, for...
Well, again, no. Well, so
If they
what happens is,
contribute
so
within
what
an
happens
opportunity
is a
zone.
corporation, right, could recognize a capital gain, and then they have a certain amount of time to take that gain and put it into a fund. Then that fund has a certain amount of time to invest it in a project, but that project has to have been acquired within a certain time frame. I want to say it's either the end of like December of 2017 or something like that, which means, so let's say Dave and I owned a property together. In order to qualify, we can't then transfer it to, let's say Ann Fedulin and Dave Thomas owned it together in a joint venture. We can't transfer it to Ann Dave LLC, right? And say, well, we created a new entity, we've transferred it, that doesn't qualify. We would have to transfer it and give up 51% of our ownership interest in order for it to qualify. So I think that's a little bit complicating. I'm not saying there's not a way for that property transfer to happen, but it's with the school, but it's complicated. And then somehow at the back end, the school district would have to get the property back. And I think one of the really one thing that's not clear under the current state of the regulations is what is that exit at the back end.
And I don't know that it has to be like a formal alignment in that way where, you know, the property transfers. I mean, we're certainly talking to folks in DC about how they manage to do some of the work, but that that there is some understanding of where the school district's investments are going, so that whatever the broader work of the opportunity zone is, that families can be assured and the communities can be assured that there's a complementary investment around the local schools that are in that.
Yeah, and I think there's a
opportunity zone.
broader conversation going on with the school district around their facilities and our, you know, the city's facilities, and how do we
Right.
connect?
So one of the other questions has a lot to do with the Mayor's Housing for Equity report, which shows that, you know, at least half of our housing needs, including like preservation of affordable rent and the need to support families making less than $42,000 a year, is targeted towards that group. And so could you talk about the ways in which the work ahead is really supporting some of our most vulnerable residents, the ones who are in the below 30% area median income, and you know, how the breakdown is proportionally of the services going towards them, because they are the ones most likely to slip into, you know, OHS and other places.
Right, right. So I don't have the proportional numbers, but I will say, I think as far as the 30% or below, the way we're trying to target that is, we've talked about shallow rent. You know, we actually have a lot of our homeowners kind of fall into that, surprisingly enough, and so our home repair grant programs and those kinds of things really help to do those folks. We support the creation of subsidized units, new units through a rehabilitation or preservation of those units through the tax credit program. We've also partnered with the Housing Authority to provide those units, but I've been pretty vocal, and I'll say it again here. It's very hard for a locality to be the entity that deals with people at 30% of income or below. I mean, it just, you know, we talked a little bit about, even if we had, those people have a $600, essentially a month disparity, right? So we look at that $7,200, but you multiply that by 70,000 people, that's $480 million a year. Right? We get 10% of that in federal dollars to deal with every issue that we have. And so I feel strongly that that is really about advocacy across the country to say that we need, those folks need housing choice vouchers. Yeah. The way to deal with people at 30% or median or below is housing choice vouchers, and they should be available the same way that food stamps are available. If you qualify, you get it. That's where we need to get in this country.
No, I appreciate that. I think part of it is also that in order for advocacy to happen, we need to have a sense of the scale of it. So one of the strongest things that we can do as a governmental body is be able to inform our advocates, like, this is the actual need that we've got. These are the populations who are represented. These are the areas and neighborhoods in which they exist. And then we give them the tools to go out and advocate. I do agree with you.
I completely agree with
to
that.
the extent
Yeah.
that you could maybe help us get a breakdown about what that looks like, because I agree with you. We cannot do it on our own. There is absolutely no way. And it is an abomination, in fact, that the federal government does not have a conversation about housing, both in terms of development, an investment and a fundamental complement with the supposed infrastructure plan that is being discussed, but also that we don't do housing vouchers through HUD. I mean, we have to bring that in, but we can't we can't just say that that's what we need. The best thing we can do is tell and keep telling the story how big the scale is of the need, how much can the city go to, because, we're maximizing out our capacity, and we don't have and help people get to the advocacy that they need to get to. And we have to drive some of that, to be perfectly honest. We got to let them know
I totally
that
agree
the
with you.
housing vouchers are where we got to go to, and that if we don't make noise here as a body, then we're not going to get it elsewhere. One quick last question is, we're hearing, the health insurance companies are starting to talk about investments in housing assistance. This is an area that we flagged in the Housing Action Plan. So can you talk a bit about how are there any current or planned efforts with some of the health insurance companies to help fund some of the housing interventions for our most vulnerable Philadelphians?
Yes. So we do have an existing partnership with our Basic System Repair Program and the Children's Hospital of Pennsylvania. They agreed to do a pilot initially where they would come in conjunction with our housing inspectors and have a health inspector come through, and it was particularly focused on triggers for asthma. And they put in a little bit amount of money through their CAP program to support, to come in with basic system repair and support doing the repairs that would alleviate those health triggers such as mold and moisture and dust and doors and windows, sealants and things like that. They were very pleased with that and have since increased their 10-unit pilot to 100 units over the first year, but they have agreed to a 5-year commitment and believe that they will continue to work with the basic system repair program and that delivery system, I should say, to figure out how to expand. We continue to have conversations with them around that. In addition, we've had somebody working to look at all the efforts across the city around housing and health, and they are numerous, but everybody's doing their own thing. So the first step was to try to figure out what's everybody got going on, and now that we're getting a handle on that, the next step is to figure out who's the stakeholder group so that we can have a united effort, and we're talking, in one regard, and we're having these conversations, and I think there's a lot of willingness on, let's say, all sides of the table to have the conversation.
And for clarity, can you just clarify who they are when you say they are developing into the 500-unit the expansion for
The Children's Hospital,
great.
Pennsylvania.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks for
The
clarifying.
Children's Hospital, Pennsylvania. Should I say it again?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Bass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple more questions for you.
No problem.
So, basic systems repair and quality control. So, David, you and I had spoken about this some time ago with a case. I'm not going to go into the details of it, but a case where there was a contractor who was doing work through basic systems repair, and the work was, I'll just say it was unacceptable. And I don't know if you remember which one I'm talking about. offhand? You want me to give you some details?
No.
No, okay. All right, you'll figure it out, I'll tell you later. But anyway, so I have some concerns about the quality control of the work that's done and making sure that the taxpayers' dollars are not wasted. And if you could talk a little bit about the quality control process, when a repair is done and when someone comes out to inspect, to ensure that the work is done according to the highest standards, how do we ensure that people are properly being taken care of when they're having this work done? You don't want to point a finger or lay blame on someone who really has done a good job, and maybe a particular homeowner just might not be happy for a number of different reasons. They might not be happy for a number of different reasons, but at the same time, how do we just make sure that they're getting their money's worth as taxpayers, that we're getting our money's worth as the City of Philadelphia and the owner of the job? Can you speak to that?
Yes. So you're absolutely correct. I believe that the constituents should be receiving quality services. We do come across situations where we have some concerns about some of the work that's being performed. And as we have always done, we inspect the property before and after for quality assurance. If I have challenges with a particular contractor, that contractor is if you will, put on probation. Hoping that contractor could improve their performances. We give them an opportunity, and quite honestly, be very direct. If they're not meeting those standards that we expect or that I expect, they get dismissed. I remove contractors just as much as I'm looking for contractors. At the end of the day, folks need to recognize, even though it's free, that these folks expect quality services, and I expect quality delivery. So at the end of the day, we have to continuously monitor folks, especially when I'm bringing in new contractors.
Right.
Because new contractors we have less familiarity with, and unfortunately, we do have some bad performers, and bad performers get dismissed.
And so, can you speak a little bit about contractors who are dismissed, have been banned? How many have we dismissed in the last year? How many have we banned in the last year? And also, I think that the presumption that the services are free, because they're not free. Somebody's paying for them. The taxpayers are paying for them. As a homeowner, that senior citizen or person who's getting the service, they're paying. They're paying for it. And the City of Philadelphia obviously is paying the contractor. But can you talk about how these contractors are removed from jobs, how they are possibly banned from jobs? How many have we done over the last year or 2 years? And in contrast, how many contractors do we work with in general? I can tell you that, we had a bill that we had passed, I think it was early last year, in which we caught a contractor dumping. They were a contractor working with the City of Philadelphia. And when we found out, we pushed a bill that was passed that said that if you are a contractor with the City of Philadelphia and you are caught dumping, you are banned from ever doing business with the City of Philadelphia again. And there were some people in the administration who felt that that was too harsh. I don't think it was harsh enough. I think if you're caught dumping in our neighborhoods, you should be banned and go to jail and pay fines and all kinds of other things. Because our neighborhoods, all of our neighborhoods are important, and we have a trash problem and so forth. So, but if you could just talk about the possibility of having some of these contractors completely removed from the system if we find that they're trying to game the system and not doing the work that is being paid for by the taxpayers.
Yeah, so a couple questions that you put out. The stable right now, I have approximately 100 contractors in the stable, various different trades. Plumbing, carpentry, roofing, electrical, as well as general contractors, and heating and air conditioning. Last year, I want to say that my memory would say that I believe I removed 4 last year, and the reason being was the quality of the work, and one was removed for their behavior, if you will, with the client. So I don't have it often, but I do have it, and to the extent that when I remove them, I have not done anything to turn them over to the city, because the work that I'm removing them for really is quality assurance, and I don't know that I can really assess their work with the city, because I'm not involved in that. So, and I do have contractors that obviously will plead to come back in. So what I've come across is that many of the contractors, because they're small, they have employees. The employees are the ones that are the bad performers, not the owner. Unfortunately, the owner is not paying attention to what the employee is doing. So, you know, I have contractors who replace employees and try to get back in the process. I give them at least 2 to 3 years away from the program before I give any consideration to renewing their opportunities.
Okay, all right, thank you. And one other question is about an article, Ann, this is for you, about an article that appeared in early March of this year on a news site that talked about an app that was used, that was through the Department of Planning for the acquisition of properties. Are you familiar with this? You're looking at me like you don't know. No?
I'm not aware. It's a app that would be, and you could acquire properties?
There was an app to, hold on, let me see. An app for selling blighted land, and the city has an app for selling off thousands of unused publicly owned lots, a website that resembles popular real estate search tools, Trulia or Zillow, with an interactive map of lots for sale. And there was one particular developer who's based in my district who was trying to purchase a piece of property. It said, you know, like this was at least 5 years, and the developer is still waiting for a response, and the developer referred to it as a black hole. Of course, I got blamed for it. I'm the one who was blamed for this particular piece
so
of...
what, I was not aware of this, but
Okay.
what's getting whispered to me is I guess that there is a shadow website
Okay, so this is not
that
a City of
appears to
Philadelphia.
be the land bank's website or a city website, but it is not.
Oh, very, very good information to know. Well, I am certainly glad that you alerted us of that. And also, we need to make sure that we let this particular reporter know, and the developer, so that they understand that this is not a silly affiliated website, app, you know, land, you know, development tool.
Yeah.
And so that's why.
Right. I mean, this is sort of under the no good deed goes unpunished. So as we make our information more public, it's easier for other people to take that information and use it how they will. And so this seems to be kind of what happened in this case. But yes, we will do our best to ensure that if folks are on this somehow, that they realize that it's not actually the city's website. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
If you have more to add, go ahead.
Hello, Angel Rodriguez, Director of Philadelphia Land Bank. Early on, we would get calls from constituents saying they had put in or submitted something, and we would ask them what website did they go to, because we would have no record of an expression of interest. What we found is that there is another website that uses, you know, similar terminology, and I'm not going to bore you with how the website search engines work, but they would get a fair amount of traffic. And then there are third parties that deal in information as information brokerages.
Sure.
So as we post any property that is a publicly owned property, they will use that, and then I'm not going to say deliberately, but it's kind of questionable as to whether they're affiliated with city agencies. At the current time, we do not use any third party to list or host or process any of the city-owned parcels.
Okay, well, I'm really glad to hear that, and I'm glad that, you know, the city's been cleared on this, and it just goes to show that, you know, even, you know, we have some reporters and folks who, you know, follow these issues, who do their due diligence. Others maybe not so much, because I think that that's something that a simple phone call to your office really could have clarified and have addressed. And, you know, it's important to be accurate, especially when the public believes so much of what they say, because it's a reputable news organization. So, so I thank you for clarifying that. Thank you
Sure.
very much. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you for bringing it to my attention.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Johnson.
Thank you, Council President. So I just want to be brief as I wrap up on my line of questioning. And so it's twofold. One, I just want to go over enforcement now, because I'm like the poster child for folks who come and say they may do one thing and then flip property. So let's talk about moving forward in the future, how we're going to address the issue of who's going to do the enforcement. What does that process look like when an individual says that this is what I'm going to do as it relates to my development plan? Just for the record, I always say this, council members do not participate in the assessment of land value. We're not involved with the settlement of the actual transaction between the developer and the City of Philadelphia land agency. If a developer decides to not build a affordable unit, or if the developer decides to say they want to does not take advantage of the height bonus, right? That doesn't have anything to do with the council person, because we don't follow up on deed restrictions. But nevertheless, just for clarity, so we can clean up this process moving forward for the future, how will we enforce to make sure that developers do not flip? Two, if they do flip a property or do not follow the agreement that they have set with the City of Philadelphia land agencies, what's the recourse and action from our land agency reps from the City of Philadelphia to recoup costs that the developers have taken advantage of as it relates to the transaction with the City of Philadelphia? And my last question is, in terms of gentrification, can we take in consideration and going back to dollar lots?
We
Wait,
have,
just to help,
let me just tell you, we have
to
that.
help some people who,
If you look
They
at
don't
our,
wanna-
look at our dispositions, there are several dollar dispositions.
okay, all right, well,
But to answer your other questions about
Sure.
so as we mentioned, particularly with the MOU being signed, now any disposition that, does require council approval, but it will also now have some kind of either a purchase development agreement or a redevelopment agreement that is, I would say much more stringent than what had been happening in the past, particularly with properties coming through the Vacant Property Review Committee. And so that will, again, have the plans attached, all that, but there will also be recorded deed restrictions. We are finding that sometimes when a property is sold to someone who purchased it from a public entity and they subsequently transfer, that sometimes the title companies aren't always picking up on those deed restrictions. But that does not mean that we do not have the ability to go back in and revert that deed. And so we are actively engaged in doing that on a few cases where the property just hasn't been developed. In addition, we do have a certain amount of inspection staff that it's their job to go out and make sure that the developer or applicant is in compliance with their agreement.
do we have relationships with the reputable deed companies to let them know that this is the action that we're taking moving forward, and they'll be working in partnership with us to just be aware?
Yeah, so the deeds are
Does that
prepared
work?
by our agencies, and they are recorded with the records department, and the records department has been great about recording them on a timely basis and all of that. It's really about the title companies, and I do think they're informed about that, and we're trying to get more information out there really about buyers too, to ensure that if you are buying something, it's worth it to get the title report. To make sure that you understand when you're buying something, what are all the encumbrances that may come with those properties, and what are the restrictions on those properties.
Okay, that's good information. Just again, want to state for the record, council members have no role in assessing land value or the closing settlement agreement between developers and the City of Philadelphia. I just think that's good information to know, because again, there's so much misinformation about this process, and it's so technical that a story could just be written with the headlines as if, the council person walks a developer through the whole process and there's no checks and balances, and then there's the narrative that there's some type of, to be quite frank with you, backroom deal transaction, but nevertheless, there's a process. that all individuals must partake in if they want to do business with the city of Philadelphia. And so there are checks and balances, but as we move forward, we'll continuously working with yourself, and I know the work that Angel is doing and working with me to make sure we get RFPs out on Point Breeze and Grays Fair to make sure that those houses remain equitable for long-term residents, and making sure that everybody has a chance to live in a second councilmatic district regardless of their checkbook and their pocketbook. So Angel, just for the record, I just want to thank you for stepping up to the plate when you took this position and really kind of right-sizing the ship and making sure that we begin taking the land bank to the next level with the intents and purposes of why it was created through the hard work of my colleague, Councilwoman Maria Quiona Sanchez. And so just thank you very much and appreciate your time today. And Dave, you keep up the good work with basic systems repair and making sure that we have people of color and diversity participating in those contract opportunities as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Reynolds Brown.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't want to miss the opportunity to thank you both. I've watched your work from afar because I don't have to be intimately involved with the nuance of your departments. And I do want to salute you for recognizing Council's continued anguish and how we have not been successful in ensuring that local people get opportunity to do business with this agency that gets so much of its funding from both the feds, the state, and us. That should not go unnoticed. And secondly, as it again relates to seniors, I know there's a broken record, but if we don't speak up for them, no one will. The major systems repair program, I can personally testify to instances where I've myself called your office and appealed to you about a senior who was in a desperate situation, and the response was quick and compassionate. And I need to say that for the record, and thank the leadership for recognizing that part of our role as elected officials is to speak up for the least of these. We thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. We'll conclude shortly. The stenographer is going to need a quick break. Real quick, Historical Commission. What's the makeup of the board? I have a number of people in particularly older parts of my council district that have a significant interest in historical properties and the designation as such. Can you first tell me who's on the Historical Commission board?
Yeah, so I'll be honest, I don't know the names off the top of my head. It's there's some ex officio people, so there's some government people. I think it's 5 or 6, and then there's several. There's a historian and an architect, but we can get you a list of everybody that's on. And I know that you recently filled your position that was on the Historical Commission, so we thank you for that.
I couldn't believe how many people were interested in being on there. They were like beating me over the head, and I finally had to make a decision, and I think Jessica will be a great addition to the Historical Board. There was a question about the demographics of that board, so if you can include all of that
we can
also.
definitely get you that information.
And then there was also
Yes.
concerns about the lack of response to the general citizen from that board. So can you inquire about that? My understanding that there have been a number of inquiries about historical Disney. I'm just passing it on, and this is the time when I get to do that.
But we can get you a list of who's on the commission.
Okay. Real quick, just wanted to follow up on, I guess, Councilman Johnson on the record conversation. The properties that, my understanding that most of the properties that are in the cities of Philadelphia's inventory were purchased through sheriff's sale for taxes, other things.
Probably.
All right, we probably
It
know a
could
little
be.
more than you do.
I honestly don't know.
The properties that were in the redevelopment authorities in inventory are properties that were probably condemned.
Yeah, it's
Am I
probably
right?
likely that they were either condemned or purchased with dollars through the NTI program, but I would say
and
the
that
bulk
was-
of them are probably from condemnation.
And those properties were probably purchased with community development block grant dollars,
So the condemnations were probably
federal or
funded.
city or what?
Yeah, so the condemnations at some point were probably funded with community development block grant dollars, but there could have been even older condemnations that were funded through federal programs like Model Cities, and there was actually an urban renewal actual
Okay.
program So probably some kind of combination of local and federal
All
dollars.
right. So my point is, with respect to that, is that those properties were purchased or through either condemnation or direct acquisition for some sort of low to moderate
Community benefit.
community benefits. So this issue around competitive sales, do we sell RDA properties through competitive sales?
Well, again, competitive sales,
question
right,
is
aren't
if we do-
necessarily to the highest bidder. That part of the component is community benefit as well.
What's the community benefit to it?
So I think it depends on what somebody proposes. But,
Well, it could be an example. It's competitive sale. You're paying $100,000.
all right, so
for
it's an RFP and it's out on the street and community benefit is part of it. If there may be a requirement for a certain amount of affordable housing, there may be a requirement. So
So
for
you
example,
are- okay.
Eighth and Vine, there's
Okay,
affordable
so-
housing, there's nonprofit office space, and there is public open space. And I'm not 100% sure, I think, is there early
Greg,
childhood?
you want to come up
education
here?
No.
So you're
But-
telling me, I just want to make sure, I want to get on the record. So you're telling me that every property that's competitively bid and sold through the Redevelopment Authority has attached to it a community benefit? So if it's market rate, somewhere in there, there's a community benefit.
Right, so competitive bid doesn't mean it's sold to the high bidder. It's sold to the
What does it mean?
project. It does not mean that. It means it's sold to the project that scores the best amongst several different factors. And one of those factors is called community impact. Another is called economic inclusion. So community impact could be a whole bunch of different things. And residential projects, usually it's affordable or workforce housing.
No, I'm not talking about workforce housing. I'm talking about competitively bid. Workforce housing is for sole
Right.
purpose of providing affordable units. I'm talking about
Yeah, so Council
properties that
President,
are just, you guys, all right, competitive bid.
that's what I'm
And
talking
you're
about.
saying you don't necessarily accept the highest bidder.
That's correct. So, Council President, for example, we just closed a whole round of about 25 competitive bids. And out of those, probably about half of the market rate competitive bidders said, I want to build workforce housing, and asked for a price that was below fair market value in order for a workforce housing project to pencil. And that was just of their own volition in order to score the points for social impact as part of that competitive bid process. So by requiring social impact as one of the scoring factors, developers responding to competitive bids know that if they want to win the property, they want to win the bid, they have to have a project that has social impact, and they have to have that impact be
What
as strong
about
as
the other
possible.
half? You said half of them. What about the other half?
There were some in there that were straight market rate projects.
So is it flexibility and requirements? I mean, if half of you said, I'm just quoting what you just said. You said half of the properties had some community benefits or some social impact. So that meant that the other half probably didn't. So I'm saying, do you get to pick and choose which ones are
Yeah.
required to have a social impact, or?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the scoring committee, the review committee goes through and scores the project. And if other factors are equal, you know, the economic inclusion is about the same, the developers have a good track record, the project is good and it's a good design, and it comes down to the social impact. The one that has the social impact is going to win over the one that doesn't. And
Okay,
that's
but I'm asking you about the ones that, the half that didn't.
right. And my
Yeah.
point is that those don't get selected if there's another project that's just as good that doesn't have the social impact. So in other words, with those competitive
That's
bids,
not a requirement then.
right, so in other words, it's working. So in other words, we're selecting the workforce housing project over another development project for the same competitive bid that had a higher price.
All right, so in other words, you're all over the
Right,
place.
okay, so I think, yeah.
You know what I'm trying to get at.
I know what you're getting at. So 20 properties went out. 10 of them were able to go to somebody who may have bid a lower value because they were doing stronger social impact.
Okay.
But 10 of those properties did not go out for lower value because of social impact. They went out for full market value, for example. I think what the council president is asking, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, is what about those 10 that went out at fair market value? Is that because nobody, like, why did they go out at full fair market value with the whole social impact piece?
Yeah, I'm just, I'm asking, I mean, Councilman started this, down this road, and my issue is that this flexibility, are any council members on the review board?
No, we never put
So
council
that all
members on
happens
the
over
review
there at
committees.
1234 Market.
And other city departments, so we typically have planning or land bank.
Not coming out of room
And
400.
then a recommendation then is provided to the council
All right.
office. The
It's
district
required?
council office.
All right. Okay, I just want to get for the record. All right. Thank you.
This circles back to questions raised by Councilman Kenyatta Johnson, myself, and Sanchez. So there's no council membership, participation, appointment to the body that ultimately renders these decisions in the way that just been
Well,
described?
let me just clarify that. So there's no council involvement on the scoring review committee. The scoring review committee does provide a recommendation to the district council person.
Okay.
And there is an action of council that is required to dispose of any publicly held property.
Through a resolution, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just want to get on the record. Thank you. I think that's it. Thank you very
Okay.
much. We're going to take a 10-minute recess. Wanna get a little break? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
And then we'll have Ellen and I up next.